My name is Ivy Whitmore. I am 32 years old. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and until a few months ago I thought my life was steady as a rock. But when I lost my job, my family mocked me. Before I continue my story, kindly take a moment to subscribe to this YouTube channel, thank you. Now back to my story. For nearly 8 years I worked as a senior project manager at one of the top tech companies in the country. It was the kind of role people fought for: 6 figures, excellent benefits, the occasional company-paid trip to New York or San Francisco. I carried the mortgage for our family's suburban home, paid for my younger brother Ethan's college tuition, and sent my parents money every month without them even having to ask. I liked the way it felt, being the reliable one. I thought they appreciated me. Then, without warning, the company announced massive layoffs. Whole departments were swallowed in a single morning meeting. My name was on the list. I remember sitting there, staring at the HR rep as if she were reading someone else's fate. By the time I drove home, my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I told my parents that evening. I expected at least a sympathetic pause on the other end of the line. Instead, Lucy, my mother, sighed like she had been waiting for this moment to happen. "Well, now you'll know what it's like to live like the rest of us," she said. Her voice had this edge, sharp and satisfied, as if I'd been showing off all these years. It didn't stop there. That weekend, we had a family barbecue at Aunt Linda's place. I almost didn't go, but part of me hoped being around them would lift my mood. Halfway through the evening, Aunt Linda, holding a paper plate piled high with potato salad, gave me a slow smile. "Miss Big Job isn't so big anymore, huh?" she said, loud enough for the cousins gathered nearby to snicker. My face burned. I set down my drink and walked to the far end of the yard, pretending to be busy scrolling my phone. But the whispers followed me, like smoke curling from a fire I couldn't see but could smell in every breath. The house I was paying for, the tuition I was covering, the bills I was quietly helping with, none of it seemed to matter anymore. All they could see was that I'd fallen, and in some twisted way it entertained them. I tried brushing it off. "It's just stress talking," I told myself. "They'll come around." But deep down, something heavy settled in my chest. It wasn't just about losing my job. I had lost my place in the family's unspoken hierarchy. Even my father, Douglas, who had always been measured in his words, didn't say much beyond a clipped, "These things happen." Then he changed the subject to the neighbor's new fence. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the barbecue scene over and over, the laughter, the way Aunt Linda's words had sliced through the air. I felt my teeth clench, not from sadness but from something sharper, the first sting of resentment. The days that followed were a blur of scrolling job boards, tailoring resumes, and trying not to drown in the sudden quiet that filled my apartment. Before, my phone rang constantly, Ethan asking for help with books, Mom updating me on a leaky roof, Dad casually mentioning a bill that just came in. Now the calls were rare, short, and cold. It was as if my value had been tied entirely to my paycheck. Without it, I was expendable. One morning, about 2 weeks after the layoff, I overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. I had gone to the family house to drop off some groceries, because old habits die hard. Lucy was in the kitchen, talking on the phone, her back to me. "She was too proud," she said, her voice dripping with judgment. "Now look at her. Maybe this will humble her a little." I froze by the doorway, the grocery bag's plastic handle cutting into my fingers. She didn't notice I was there until she turned and saw me. Her face flickered, guilt, surprise, then a forced smile. "Who was that?" I asked. "Oh, just your Aunt Cheryl," she said, waving it off. Nothing important. But it was important. It was the confirmation of what I'd been sensing all along. They weren't just indifferent to my struggle, they were quietly reveling in it. I drove home with my stomach in knots. The Atlanta streets blurred by, a familiar city suddenly feeling less like home. I thought about the mortgage payment I had made just 3 days earlier, the one keeping a roof over their heads. I thought about how no one had asked if I was okay, if I needed help, if I even had enough to eat. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, my hands were cold on the steering wheel. Something inside me shifted. I realized then that I was alone, not in the tragic movie scene way, but in the plain, practical truth of it. The safety net I thought I had was nothing but air, and I would have to climb out of this hole by myself. Still, there was a part of me, small but stubborn, that believed I'd find a way back up. That belief was the only thing I carried with me into the long, uncertain days ahead. The job hunt became my full-time occupation. Every rejection email felt like another weight on my chest, but I kept going. I downsized my meals: instant noodles, canned soup, coffee brewed twice from the same grounds. The apartment grew quieter. Even the walls seemed to press in on me some nights. But every month, without fail, I still sent partial mortgage payments for the family house. I told myself it was the right thing to do, that one day they'd see I hadn't abandoned them. It would take many more months before I realized that doing the right thing for people who only saw you as a wallet was just another form of self-betrayal. And yet, at that time, I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. The first month without a paycheck felt like stepping into a slow-moving storm. First you think you can outrun it, but eventually it catches you. The bills didn't care that I'd been laid off. My rent was due, the utilities kept climbing, and the student loan company still sent cheerful reminders that my payment was expected on time as always. I stretched every dollar, learning how to make a can of beans last 3 meals. I still made partial payments on the mortgage for the family house, clinging to the belief that my sacrifice meant something. But the silence from them grew louder. Finn, my younger brother, had been calling me almost every week when I was paying for his textbooks and meal plan. Now he let my calls go to voicemail. When I texted him once to ask how his semester was going, he replied with a one-word "fine." I stared at the screen, wondering if that was guilt or just indifference. Dad had stopped asking how I was doing entirely. If we spoke at all, it was about the weather or his golf league. The unspoken rule seemed to be that my job loss was a topic to avoid, unless it was behind my back. I knew because the whispers found their way to me in pieces. A cousin messaged me late one night. "Just so you know, Aunt Linda was talking about you at dinner last week." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. I could already imagine her tone, the same one she'd used at the barbecue. Every rejection letter stung, but the worst were the ones that didn't even bother with words, just an automated "your application has been reviewed" email. I was Ivy Whitmore, the woman who'd once had recruiters knocking on her inbox, now reduced to a name in a spreadsheet no one cared to scroll down to. One rainy Tuesday, after a particularly brutal round of rejections, I drove over to the family house again. It was habit as much as anything else. Checking in, making sure everything was fine. I brought groceries because I knew Lucy wouldn't have bought the fresh produce she loved otherwise. She was sitting in the living room with the TV on low, phone pressed to her ear. I caught the tail end of her sentence. She thought she was better than everyone else. My name wasn't said, but it didn't have to be. I stood there just inside the door listening. "She needs to understand what real life is," Lucy continued. "No one's bailing her out now." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. No one's bailing me out? I was still the one making sure they didn't lose the house. But the words didn't come out. Instead, I quietly set the grocery bags on the kitchen counter and left without saying goodbye. In my car, I sat for a long time watching the rain streak across the windshield. It wasn't anger that hit me in that moment, it was something colder. Disbelief, maybe. Or the slow dawning of a truth I'd been avoiding. They were fine watching me sink. The isolation became physical. Days would pass without my speaking to another human being in person. The walls of my apartment seemed to hum with my own breathing at night. I kept my blinds half drawn, not wanting to see the outside world moving on without me. The few friends I'd once had in the city started fading too. They were busy with their own lives, and I didn't blame them. Nobody wants to be around someone whose entire story has turned into a list of failures. I found small routines to keep myself from collapsing into bed all day. I'd wake up early, make coffee, and scroll through job postings for hours. Around lunchtime, I'd force myself to walk around the block just to feel air that wasn't recycled through my apartment. In the evenings, I'd watch old documentaries or listen to podcasts about people who'd gone broke and bounced back. I clung to those stories like a lifeline. And yet, even as my bank account thinned, I kept making those mortgage payments. It wasn't just duty. It was some warped hope that the next time Lucy or Ethan looked at me, they'd remember that I never left them stranded. But hope is a fragile thing. One evening, I logged into my bank account after sending off the latest payment and saw my balance dip into the low triple digits. For the first time, I wondered how long I could keep this up without putting myself on the street. The thought scared me. It also planted the seed of a question I wasn't ready to answer yet. Who would be there for me if I truly lost everything? The answer came quicker than I expected. About 3 months into my unemployment, I caught another conversation, not in person this time but online. My cousin had posted a photo from a family gathering I hadn't even been invited to. In the comments, someone had joked, "Where's Ivy?" And Aunt Linda replied, "Probably at home counting pennies." I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. My chest felt tight, not from sadness but from something heavier, denser. The kind of weight that doesn't just sit in you, it begins to reshape you. I put my phone down, leaned back in the couch, and closed my eyes. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet shift was happening. I didn't know it then, but this was the moment I stopped longing for their approval. From here on out, I would survive for me. And if I ever climbed out of this hole, I would decide exactly who got to stand beside me at the top. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, just when I was beginning to accept that the rejection cycle might never end. I had been staring at my laptop for hours, sending out applications to companies that barely seemed to exist outside of job boards when my phone rang. The number was from California. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something nudged me to answer. "Hello? Hi, is this Ivy Whitmore?" The voice was warm, professional. "This is Laura Chong, head of talent at Neural Tech Systems in Los Angeles. We reviewed your portfolio and wanted to discuss an opportunity with you." My heart slammed against my ribs. Neural Tech wasn't just another tech company, it was the AI firm everyone in the industry wanted to work for. I had applied to them months ago and assumed my resume had been lost in the shuffle. Laura explained that they were expanding a major project and needed someone with my exact experience. She asked if I could do a virtual interview that same afternoon. "Yes," I said before she could finish the sentence. The interview was a blur, in the best way. For the first time in months, I was talking about my skills, my strategies, my vision for projects. I felt alive again, as if the months of silence and shame had been nothing more than an ugly dream. 2 days later, Laura called back. "Ivy, we'd like to formally offer you the position of Senior Director of Project Operations here at Neural Tech. The salary will be $435,000 annually, plus a $100,000 signing bonus and full relocation coverage." I stared at my living room wall. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" She laughed. "Of course. And we'd like you to start in 6 weeks. When the call ended, I sat perfectly still, letting the numbers sink in. Triple my old salary. A signing bonus that could pay off half my student loans in one stroke. And Los Angeles, sun, ocean, a fresh start. But I didn't tell my family. Not a word. That night, I ate my noodles with a smile so wide it hurt. I thought about every conversation I'd overheard, every sarcastic comment, every cold shoulder. I thought about the house I'd been keeping afloat without thanks. Now I finally had something they didn't know about, something they couldn't touch. Over the next few weeks, I began to prepare quietly. I cut back even further on spending, saving every spare dollar. I started researching Los Angeles neighborhoods, touring homes online with price tags that had once felt laughably out of reach. The mortgage payment for the family house was still going out each month, but it no longer felt like a lifeline for them. It felt like a leash I could cut whenever I was ready. By week 5, I had signed my contract with Neuraltech, accepted my relocation package, and booked my flight to LA. I still hadn't told a soul. The news finally reached them in the way small-town gossip always does, through someone who knew someone. Victoria Hayes, a friend from my old professional network, bumped into Ethan at a coffee shop. She mentioned casually, "I heard your sister's working at Neuraltech now." That's huge. By the next morning, my phone was lighting up. First it was Ethan, suddenly chatty, asking how I'd been. Then Lucy called, her tone dripping with sweetness I hadn't heard in months. "Honey, I'm so glad you're back on your feet," she said. "We were all so worried about you." I bit back a laugh. Worried? Not once had they asked how I was during those long months. Then came the requests, subtle at first, then not at all. Lucy hinted that now would be a good time to just clear the mortgage entirely so we could all breathe easier. Ethan sent me a PDF of his car loan statement, saying it would mean a lot if I could pay it off. Uncle Robert's email was the longest, 3 paragraphs about his restaurant being in debt and how a little family investment could turn it around. I didn't respond to any of them right away. Instead, I closed my laptop, poured a glass of wine, and stepped out onto my tiny balcony. Atlanta's night air was warm and heavy, the street below quiet. I thought about the difference between help freely given and help demanded like a tax. And in that moment, I decided my next move. They would get nothing, not the mortgage, not the car, not the restaurant bailout. My money would build something for me. And it would be bigger, brighter, and more beautiful than anything they had ever imagined. I didn't have to make any announcements. The news of my comeback spread on its own, weaving through cousins, uncles, and whoever else thrived on updates about the Whitmore family. In the weeks before my move, the tone of their calls shifted from cautious curiosity to open expectation. Ethan called one evening with the casual confidence of someone asking for a ride to the airport. "So, Mom says you're doing well now. You think you could help me pay off my car? Interest rates are killing me." He said it like it was already decided, like my new job existed for that very purpose. I kept my voice even. "I'll think about it." Lucy wasn't nearly as subtle. She called 2 days later, her voice syrupy and deliberate. "Sweetheart, I was talking with your father, and we agreed it would be a huge relief if you could just take care of the mortgage now. You've done so much already, but, well, you're in a different position now, aren't you?" "Yes," I said. "I'll look into it." Even Uncle Robert got in on the act. His email was almost a business proposal. "I know you're a strategic thinker, Ivy. If you could loan me $50,000 to clear the restaurant's debt, I could turn this place around in no time." He ended it with "family first, always." I smiled as I read it. If only he knew how often family had put me last. By the time my relocation date arrived, I'd made my decision. I found a place in Beverly Hills, an airy modern mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows, an infinity pool that seemed to spill into the skyline, and a wine cellar built into glass walls. It was $4.2 million, paid for in full, no co-owners, no shared deeds. My name. Mine. I finalized the sale in quiet satisfaction. No more splitting my income across a dozen emergencies that never seemed to end. No more watching my bank account shrink for people who mocked me when I was down. The first month in Los Angeles was like stepping into a new life. Mornings started with sunlight spilling across polished marble floors. I drove down palm-lined streets in my new car, the air warm and salty from the Pacific. Evenings were for networking dinners, rooftop events, and meeting people who saw me for what I could do, not what I could give. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, the family's house was slipping into trouble. Without my payments, the mortgage went unpaid. I didn't need to check, but I did, just to watch it unfold. The first foreclosure notice arrived in their mailbox 2 months after I stopped sending money. Ethan called, his voice panicked. "Ivy, we're getting letters from the bank. Mom's freaking out. Can you please do something?" I thought about the nights I'd eaten instant noodles so they could stay comfortable. I thought about Lucy's voice on the phone telling someone I needed to be humbled. I thought you wanted to live like the rest of us, I said quietly. Now you can. He was silent. Calls from Lucy came next. First they were urgent, pleading. Then they turned sharp, accusing me of abandoning them. I listened without interruption, then reminded her of the words she'd once used. If I could survive like the rest of you, so can you. The line went quiet for a long time. Then she hung up. I didn't block them. I just let the distance grow. While they scrambled, I planned my housewarming. It was a formal invite-only event, champagne towers, a private chef, live jazz on the terrace. I posted photos to Instagram of the pool glowing at night, the city glittering below. The captions weren't cruel, but they were deliberate, built this life from scratch. No handouts, just grit. New chapter. Comments flooded in from colleagues, new friends, and distant acquaintances. The family? Silent. But I knew they saw it. And that was enough. The foreclosure notice became public record within weeks. That's how I knew the panic had reached a boiling point. Friends of friends started mentioning it to me at industry events. I didn't flinch. It wasn't my secret to hide anymore. Lucy called again, this time with her voice breaking. Ivy, the bank is giving us 30 days. We could lose the house. Please, please fix this. I leaned back in my chair, the Los Angeles sun spilling through my window, warming my shoulders. Do you remember what Aunt Linda said at that barbecue? I asked her. Miss Big Job isn't so big anymore? That was a joke, she said quickly. No, I said, my tone calm but unyielding. It was the truth you were comfortable saying out loud when you thought I had nothing. And when you thought I couldn't hear you on the phone, you told people I was too proud. You told them I needed to be humbled. Now you're living in that humility. She started to say something else, but I ended the call. It wasn't rage that drove me, it was the clarity of knowing where I stood. 4 years I had been the safety net. Now I understood how much of that love had been tied to the net itself, not the person holding it. Days later, my housewarming arrived. My new world came alive that night. Soft jazz spilling from the terrace, champagne bubbling in flutes, city lights stretching to the horizon. Guests in evening dresses and tailored suits moved through the open spaces, complementing the architecture, the view, the art. I wore a backless silk gown and greeted each guest with a smile that didn't need to prove anything. I didn't invite a single family member. At one point, I stepped onto the rooftop terrace alone, holding my glass of champagne. The night air was warm, the scent of the ocean drifting faintly inland. Below, Los Angeles shimmered like a living thing. I thought about the months I'd spent counting coins for instant noodles while still paying for a house I didn't live in. I thought about the way their voices had changed when they found out I was back on my feet. I whispered to myself, never again. From that night forward, my life was mine. My success wasn't a family resource. It was my foundation, my proof that I could be knocked flat and still rise higher than before. The family eventually lost the Atlanta house. They moved into a smaller place, one they could afford without me. They didn't send me the address. I didn't ask. I wasn't cruel enough to wish them harm. I simply chose not to be their solution anymore. Instead, I filled my days with work I loved, surrounded by people who celebrated my wins without asking what they could get from them. I traveled when I wanted, invested where it made sense, and built a life I didn't need to recover from. Freedom didn't feel loud. It felt quiet, steady, like finally standing on ground that wouldn't shift beneath me. Sometimes I'd get a text from a distant cousin saying, "Your mom talks about you all the time." I never replied. Whatever she said now wasn't for me, it was for her audience. I had already heard the truth when it mattered most. So I stayed here, high above the city, watching the sun sink into the Pacific, sipping champagne on my own terms. And for the first time in years, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. Thank you for watching. Kindly like, subscribe, and comment your thought in the comment section. Until I come your way with another story, for now from me it is bye.